If you're looking for adventure, then don't be missing Jakers, The Adventures of Piggly-Winks.
Tell us the rest.
I'm Grandpa Piggy, and I love telling stories about my own adventure-filled childhood. Ah, the fun we had and the lessons we learned.
Jakers, that's grand.
Watch Jakers, The Adventures of Piggly-Winks.
Good evening, I'm Jim Lehrer. On the News Hour tonight, our summary of the news. Then the latest on the Moussaoui and Hamdi terrorism cases, a health unit report on the care and treatment of American service personnel wounded in Iraq, a conversation with the Israeli and the Palestinian who have created waves with their own unofficial plan for peace, and an Ann Taylor Fleming look at what really matters.
Major funding for the News Hour with Jim Lehrer has been provided by...
What if we looked at the world as one giant farm field? When crops grow where they grow best, we improve agricultural efficiency, make food more affordable, and feed a hungry world. ADM, the nature of what's to come.
And by the SBC companies, 125 years of sweat, of building networks, of getting the job done. After 125 years, we are just getting started. SBC, going beyond the call.
This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
The U.S. may turn to Iraqi militias to help battle insurgents. The current head of the country's governing council, Abdelaziz al-Hakim, outlined the plan today. He said Iraq's 5 largest political parties would lend militiamen to a new paramilitary force, and that force would eventually join the country's new military structure. But a top American advisor in Baghdad said there would be conditions.
Any domestic security services would have to be fully vetted for debathification and other ties to the former regime. They would have to be trained in the highest standards of professionalism and human rights. They would have to be under the Ministry of Interior and coordinate with the coalition command and control structure. And finally, to your point, any individual that is recruited and serves must serve as an individual under a new Iraq, unified Iraq security service. They cannot be serving to represent a political party or a particular militia.
Some smaller political factions in Iraq objected to the plan. The Washington Post quoted an independent member of the governing council who called it a big blunder. He said we should be dissolving militias, not finding ways to legitimize them. This sends the wrong message to the Iraqi people. Police in Saudi Arabia have made their first arrest in a deadly bombing last month. They said today the suspect was picked up last week. At least 17 people died in the November 8th attack on a housing compound in Riyadh. More than 120 others were injured. A terrorist suspect born in the United States and captured in Afghanistan will see his lawyer after all. The Defense Department announced that last night. Yasser Hamdi is classified as an enemy combatant. He's had no access to a lawyer up to now, but he's appealing that issue to the U.S. Supreme Court. And in Richmond, Virginia today, a federal appeals court heard arguments on giving Zacarias Moussaoui access to 3 al-Qaeda detainees. He says they could prove his innocence in the 9/11 plot. We'll have more on both cases in just a moment. The Bush administration said today it's still committed to the roadmap to Middle East peace. But Secretary of State Powell said again he also welcomes an unofficial plan, the so-called Geneva Accord. Traveling in Morocco, he said, the more people who talk about the prospect of peace, the better off we are. Israel has condemned Powell's decision to meet with former Israeli and Palestinian officials behind the Geneva Accord. We'll talk with them later in the program tonight. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission proposed new rules today to stop after-hours trading in mutual funds. Regulators have alleged that many brokerage firms allowed favored clients to make late trades. That practice puts ordinary investors at a disadvantage. But the SEC chairman, William Donaldson, said his agency is determined to restore investor confidence.
Where we see areas in need of improvement, we are addressing them. Our commitment to investors must extend to anticipating the wrongdoing that often accompanies the constant changes in our marketplace and remaining at least one step ahead. The investing public deserves nothing less.
The proposed rules are open for public comment for 60 days. American workers increased productivity in the third quarter by the most in 20 years. The Labor Department reported that today. It said from July to September, worker output shot up at an annual rate of 9.4%. That's more than a full point better than the original estimate. On Wall Street today, the Dow Jones Industrial Average gained more than 19 points to close at 98.73. The Nasdaq fell more than 19 points to close at 1960. Earlier, it traded above the 2,000 mark for the first time in nearly 2 years. Investigators in Columbus, Ohio, sorted through hundreds of tips today in a series of 12 shootings. The attacks go back to last May. Nearly all were along a 5-mile stretch of Interstate 270 south of the city. One woman was killed last week when a bullet hit the car she was in. Earlier in November, a bullet hit an elementary school in the same area. And that's it for the news summary tonight. Now it's on to the Moussaoui and Hamdi cases, the wounded from Iraq, another way to peace, and an Ann Taylor Fleming essay. Gwen Eiffel has our update of the 2 terrorism cases.
Now, courts and the government wrestle with the prosecution of terrorism cases. Federal judges in Richmond, Virginia heard arguments today over whether Zacharias Moussaoui, the only person yet charged in the September 11th attacks, can mount a defense by calling other al-Qaeda suspects as witnesses. And in another case, the Pentagon reversed itself to allow Yasser Hamdi, who was seized in Afghanistan, to have access to a lawyer for the first time in 19 months. Phil Sheenan of the New York Times was in court today for the Moussaoui hearing. He's here now to bring us up to date. So tell me what happened in the court today. What was the purpose of today's hearing?
This was an appeal by the government of a decision by the trial judge in the case to throw out the use of the death penalty against Moussaoui, and indeed to throw out much of the case against Moussaoui, specifically all the charges involving the 9/11 attacks. She sanctioned the government after the government refused to turn over defense witnesses, captured al-Qaeda people who might be able to help Moussaoui in his defense.
So who are these 2 witnesses who he wanted, or 3 witnesses, I guess, overall, who he wanted called in his defense, and why were they important to his case?
Well, I mean, I think they're arguably very important to his case. These are captured al-Qaeda folks in U.S. custody who were involved in the planning of the 9/11 attacks. This really began with the capture last year of a fellow by the name of Ramzi bin al-Shib, a young Yemeni, who is identified in Moussaoui's indictment as the key middleman between Moussaoui and the 9/11 hijackers. He was apprehended. Moussaoui's lawyers went to court quickly and said, we need access to this man. He may be able to show that our client is innocent.
And the lower court judge, Brinkema, said, okay, I think that's reasonable. If this client's going to be brought up on a death penalty charge, he ought to be able to call his own witnesses. And the government said no. Why?
Well, the government says that the 6th Amendment of the Constitution, and the 6th Amendment gives criminal defendants the right to seek out testimony that might exonerate them. The government said that the 6th Amendment does not extend overseas to enemy combatants, foreign citizens held by the United States abroad. Moussaoui's lawyers say that's rubbish, and that the rights Moussaoui has to exonerate himself through defense testimony certainly extends to somebody held by the United States, albeit overseas.
Does Moussaoui have reason, or have he or his lawyers presented evidence to suggest why he believes these 2 or 3 other suspects would exonerate him?
Well, a lot of this has gone on behind closed doors as to what the defense lawyers know and what the government knows about these men held overseas. But what I think many of us have learned over time is that indeed some of these captured al-Qaeda people have said that Moussawi had nothing to do with 9/11. In fact, some of them apparently thought he was mentally unbalanced and would never have been invited to participate in 9/11. And that could be quite damaging testimony to the government's case.
So whatever the outcome, this goes farther than just Zacarias Moussawi's case, doesn't it?
Oh, sure. The government says that if they lose on this issue, they've got a real problem in the future on bringing any terrorist suspects to trial in civilian courts, because presumably every terrorist suspect would simply say, I need access to every terrorist you have in custody because they may be able to exonerate me. The government's really up against a wall on this case.
Were any of those ramifications, potential ramifications, raised today in the arguments in the court?
Yes, I mean the government has made it pretty clear that if they are defeated on this issue, they're going to have a real problem bringing any terrorists to trial in civilian courts in the United States, and may actually have trouble bringing them to trial in any jurisdiction, a military tribunal or whatever. And I think everybody is aware of what's at stake here.
Would what is at stake be as difficult or be as pointed if it weren't about the death penalty, or is it just the general principle of the thing?
I think it's both. I think this Justice Department is very, very eager. This government is very eager to impose the death penalty in this case. This is such a high-profile case. Moussawi is the most prominent terrorist suspect apprehended publicly and brought before an American court since 9/11, and the government had pinned an awful lot of hopes on using this as a trial to explain what happened in 9/11 and showing that Moussawi was some sort of participant in it.
If the government loses this fight, this round, do they just yank this out of civilian court and take it back to a military tribunal, for instance?
That's something they have discussed, because there is a belief that Moussawi may have fewer rights to get access to these people abroad than he would in a civilian court. But I think you'll see appeal on this thing, and I think many criminal law specialists would not be the least bit surprised if this ends up before the United States Supreme Court.
Now, another example of the difficulty the government is having trying to prosecute these terrorism cases is the case of Yasser Hamdi, a U.S. citizen who's been held for 19 months without access to a lawyer. The government decided, the Pentagon announced last night, okay, he can see a lawyer. What was the reason for that reversal? Do we know?
We don't know entirely what happened here, but this does seem to be indeed a reversal by the government, and I think people will argue that the government to some extent is giving in to the international public pressure to allow more due process to some of these enemy combatants. In this case, you had an American citizen held in the United States without the ability to get contact with a lawyer, and I think that offended an awful lot of people, including people who would normally support the Bush administration in its prosecution of terrorism.
You know, the government went out of its way, I guess, in the statement last night to say, don't read anything more into this than just this case. Is it possible to do that?
I don't think so, and I think everybody is reading into this that they have backed down to some degree. The fact that Hamdi was an American citizen makes a big difference here, and I don't think you'll see them backing down in this sort of way with enemy combatants who are foreign citizens.
And in the last case, John Walker Lind, where an American citizen was brought up, he pled guilty, so this never even got to this point where it was discussed.
No, and I think there's an argument that the government in that case backed down. Lind's lawyers made many of the same arguments as Moussawi's lawyers, that they should have access to these captured al-Qaeda people. The Justice Department, rather than trying to argue that out through the appeals court, simply gave in, and gave in maybe the wrong word, but they at least reached a plea agreement that allowed Lind someday to see freedom.
And when do we expect the Court of Appeals to rule?
I think we expect this three-judge panel to rule pretty quickly. They've had this issue to hash out for many months now. This is not the first time they've visited this issue. So you may have a decision from them within days or within a couple of weeks.
Okay, Phil Sheenan, thanks a lot.
Now, caring for the wounded returning from Iraq. Our story is reported by Susan Dinser of our Health Unit, a partnership with the Henry J. Kaiser Family Foundation.
B.J. Jackson walks a bit awkwardly. But in many respects, it's impressive that Jackson, a 22-year-old Iowa National Guardsman, is walking at all.
That's where most of the weight bears.
Jackson, shown here with his wife, Abby, was attacked while riding in a Humvee in Baghdad last August. He lost the lower third of both legs and now walks with prosthetics.
The only thing I remember is yelling for my wifey and my kids.
Jackson still has difficulty speaking due to damage to his vocal cords. He wears a hat to cover burns on his head.
And I was told a phosphorus landmine went off underneath the vehicle. An RPG hit the side of the vehicle. And there was guys in 3 buildings on each side, firing AKs. I lost both my legs below the knee and 6% body burn on my hand, arm, and my head and low back. And lost my legs due to the burns.
Army Major Lanier Ward is another of the wounded. Last June, the Humvee he was riding in was attacked with a remote-controlled bomb.
I began to move out of the vehicle when my arm fell essentially in between my legs. At that time, I just had a couple pieces of skin and muscle that kept the arm attached. And so the mind can do some incredible things. I picked up my arm with my left hand and I moved to the other side of the vehicle. At that time, I gave out of gas.
As the violence rages on in Iraq, the number of injured U.S. military personnel continues to rise. Approximately 1,900 have been wounded since the war began last March. The experiences of Jackson and Ward shed light on ways military medicine has changed from past wars. It's also built on techniques developed during those conflicts.
Roughly 660 patients to date, that's about a third of those wounded in Iraq, have been brought here to Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas. It's the Defense Department's premier burn treatment center, and that makes it the right place to bring patients who've both been severely burned and suffered serious orthopedic injuries to their arms and their legs.
Dr. Mark Bagg is chief of orthopedic surgery at Brooke and the Army's top consultant on orthopedic surgical issues. He says one change is the type of wounds that have resulted from use of new lightweight body armor. Called the Interceptor and produced by Point Blank Body Armor, it consists of layers of a material called Kevlar, backed up with special ceramic plates.
Body armor is a jacket, a vest that covers the chest, the abdomen, the back, and the spine. The good news is they're surviving their injuries, we think, because of the body armor. Bad news is that there are some very devastating injuries to the extremities as a result of their surviving the initial blast.
In fact, nearly 3/4 of wounds from the Iraq conflict are serious arm and leg injuries, like Jackson's and Ward's. To date, there have also been about 70 amputations. Personnel wounded in Iraq have benefited from 2 enhancements over previous wars. One is the availability of more sophisticated medical treatment provided close to the battlefield. Another is a so-called evacuation chain. It allows the wounded to be cared for in stages as they're moved gradually back to the United States. It also keeps hospitals along the chain from being overwhelmed by the volume of injured. After his Humvee was attacked, Jackson was flown almost immediately to an Army combat hospital in Kuwait, where his legs were amputated. Lanier Ward was taken to a so-called forward surgical team just minutes away by helicopter.
I'd lost an artery within my arm, and I'd lost a large amount of blood. The team, though, the forward surgical team, continued with saving my life, along with saving my arm. And they were able to get they removed a vein from my leg and placed the vein in my arm. And this is at a very forward location.
After their initial surgeries in theater, Ward and Jackson were flown to the Army's Regional Medical Center at Landstuhl in Germany. Within several days, they were brought back to the United States. Along the evacuation chain, their wounds were repeatedly cleaned out and dead tissue removed in surgery similar to this shown here. That's the way to prevent a potentially fatal infection until the wounds can be closed and so-called definitive care provided back in the United States. At Brooke, Ward underwent additional surgery to reconstruct his arm. including extensive repairs to muscle, skin, and bone.
How much are you using your hand at this point?
For smaller functions, I can actually utilize it. Opening refrigerator doors, picking up some items.
Ward's doctor, orthopedic trauma specialist Roman Hayda, says additional surgery lies ahead.
We're still in a very active phase of treatment. What we're faced with now is that now that we know that the fracture has healed and there's no sign of infection, he has developed a lot of abnormal bone formation in the muscle tissue. And so we are at the point where we're considering going back in surgically to excise that bone and then release some of the scar that is blocking motion in his elbow, which will improve motion there.
For his part, Jackson spent 47 days in the intensive care unit at Brooke, all but 1 week of it under heavy sedation.
What was the first point at which you were conscious enough to realize that you had lost both your legs?
When I first woke up, I seen the cast, but it didn't really set in until they cut the cast off. To look at my sutures and the burn on my leg, see how they were healing. It was pretty hard at first, but I had a lot of support.
Army Lieutenant Colonel Alfredo Montalvo is a psychiatric clinical nurse specialist. He's helped care for Jackson during his stay at Brooke.
When a person experiences a burn injury or an amputation, life is going to change for that person. Most people undergo something called the grieving process. And the first stage of the grieving process is shock and disbelief.
What's the rest of the process?
Depression, anger, existential questions, why me? And finally acceptance. It isn't that smooth. Sometimes they may jump back to anger, depression. There's good days, there's bad days.
Jackson's wife, Abby, says her husband's moods have followed that pattern.
He does a lot better than I would expect anyone to do. He has good days and bad days, but in return I have good days and bad days, so he's done really well.
I saw his spirit soar when he was able to walk. That was a big turning point that I saw. I can walk. I will walk again.
Along with other military amputees, Jackson has benefited from recent improvements in prosthetics. He demonstrated the set he's now wearing, his third and most sophisticated to date.
They're really easy to put on, take off. It's a flexor foot. It's a high energy foot. So when you step and start to walk, it springs your foot forward. When you're an amputee, you use more energy to walk than folks that aren't. So that gives you a little push. Most of the time, unless I'm really sore, if I have my pant legs down, people can't even tell that I'm amputated.
Jackson now spends several hours a day working with physical and occupational therapists at Brooke. For now, he, Abby, and their 2 daughters stay at a special residential facility on the Brooke campus. They plan to return permanently sometime soon to their home in Des Moines, Iowa.
Still to come on the NewsHour tonight, a new plan for peace in the Middle East and an Ann Taylor Fleming essay. But first, this is Pledge Week on public television. We're taking a short break now so your public television station can ask for your support. That support helps keep programs like ours on the air. For those stations not taking a pledge break, the NewsHour continues now with a report from Julian Rush of Independent Television News. It's about a fight over a proposed dam in the Central American country of Belize. The former British colony's final court of appeal is in London, where the case was argued today.
The remote upper reaches of the Michels River are home to rare and endangered wildlife. It's the only place this species of scarlet macaw lives, for example. Just a few hundred pairs remain. Tapirs bathe in the river, jaguars stalk the rainforest, all living and feeding undisturbed in a unique riverbank habitat.
It's the most ecologically rich areas left in Central America. Keep in mind, 70% of Central America has been destroyed in the past 40 years. Here exists an absolute gem of biodiversity.
The Chililo Dam is meant to control the flow of the Michels River to hydroelectric turbines downstream. It dries out for much of the year, so the idea is to flood a 20-mile-long reservoir to keep the turbines running all year round. In line with Belize law, the Belize Electricity Company commissioned an environmental impact assessment from the British firm AMEC. It's been controversial from the start. First, charges that warnings about the damage to wildlife were given little or no prominence. And now the preliminary construction work has begun, claims the assessment has completely misrepresented a fundamental factor, the geology of the site. The geological row centres on the bedrock the dam is to be built on. In the environmental impact assessment, and this is just part of it, it's said to be granite, which would make a firm foundation for the dam. On the map you can see the river, the site of the proposed dam, and granite cross-hatched either side. But a consultant geologist who was originally hired by the electricity company and told them it wasn't granite has been back to the site just over a month ago. He'll tell the Privy Council that the rocks here are actually soft shales and limestone. Now that doesn't stop the dam being built, but it makes it a lot more difficult and expensive.
I was, I guess, a bit surprised at how soft it was. I mean, you could easily push this stuff with a bulldozer or a scraper. One is led to question then the validity of the entire geologic mapping that had been done by AMEC at the site, where it was characterized as granite.
And then there's the mystery of the missing geological fault line. This map in the environmental impact assessment is based upon this original. Now here's the dam site and here's a fault line. It's about 300 metres away in real life, a sign that the rocks there have slipped. But on the assessment map, that's missing. Faults matter. They're places where the earth could move, risking the dam bursting to flood the people downstream. So an admission from the Belize Electricity Company, privatised now and owned by the Canadian multinational Fortis, was a bombshell. They had got the geology wrong, and they'd known for over a year from a geologist report they'd commissioned but refused to make public. We've seen a copy. There is no evidence of any granitic intrusion, it says. And as for the missing fault line, well, they can't explain it, but it's apparently very obvious on the ground. The rationale for the removal is unknown, it says, as this fault outcrops spectacularly in the Michels riverbed and left bank. AMEC say the fault line is shown on another map in their assessment, but it's not referred to in the text. The electricity company says it makes no difference.
You don't have to re-engineer the dam. That's what we've been explaining all along, that the dam design is based on the qualities of the rock, not the name of the rock. And the properties of the rock were correctly identified.
The opponents of the dam have exhausted the legal process in Belize, which is why they're in London on a cold, damp November day. The archaic, even anachronistic Privy Council, their last chance. At the Privy Council, in Downing Street no less, 5 law lords will have to decide if the original environmental assessment was so flawed, the impact it describes no longer relevant, that the Belize government will have to start again. We put that point to AMEC, who wouldn't be interviewed, but in a statement they said, AMEC produced a thoroughly professional, highly detailed report that has been debated thoroughly by government and independent bodies. AMEC insists too it's no longer connected with the project. The Privy Council's decision is expected in the new year.
Now, a private plan for peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Spencer Michels begins our coverage.
Self-appointed Israeli and Palestinian negotiators gathered in Switzerland Monday to present the so-called Geneva Accord, an unofficial peace proposal. Its architects, who began their secret negotiations more than 2 years ago, are Yossi Beilin, a former Israeli justice minister, and Yasser Abed Rabbo, a former Palestinian information minister.
We are saying to you, every issue can be solved. Don't give up on us.
The Palestinian people want peace.
The Israeli people want peace. The world wants peace. Will we allow a few of the enemies of peace to destroy our dreams?
The Geneva Accord is one of a half-dozen peace proposals launched in the past several months, as official efforts by the U.S., Israelis, and Palestinians to implement the so-called roadmap have faltered. 50 pages long, the accord is perhaps the most comprehensive plan to date, with specific language on everything from borders to Jerusalem to a Palestinian state. It was presented amid much fanfare.
Former President Jimmy Carter.
Actor Richard Dreyfuss presided over Monday's ceremony. Among the international leaders in attendance was former President Jimmy Carter.
No matter what leaders the Palestinians might choose, no matter how fervent American interests might be, or how great the hatred and bloodshed might become, there remains one basic choice for the Israelis. Do we want permanent peace with all our neighbors, or do we want to retain our settlements throughout the occupied territories? And it is of equal importance that the Palestinians renounce violence against Israeli citizens in exchange for the commitments of this Geneva initiative.
The plan was mailed to every household in Israel and published in Palestinian newspapers. It has sparked international reaction and a dispute between the Israeli government and the Bush administration. Secretary of State Colin Powell welcomed the accord. His decision to meet later this week with the plan's authors provoked sharp criticism from the Sharon government, which has opposed the plan. Israeli Vice Premier Ehud Olmert said of Powell, "I think he is making a mistake. I think he is not helping the process." Yesterday, while traveling in Africa, Secretary Powell responded.
I have an obligation to the American people and to the President and to the other of my colleagues in the administration to listen to individuals who have interesting ideas. This in no way undercuts our strong support for the State of Israel. This in no way undercuts our support for the roadmap. On behalf of the administration, we welcomed the initiatives, these two initiatives that are much in the press right now. We didn't adopt them. We just welcomed the fact that they were new ideas.
Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat called the plan a brave initiative that opens the door to hope, but several Palestinian militant groups have rejected it.
And joining us now are the authors of the Geneva Plan, Yossi Beilin and Yasser Abed Rabbo. Mr. Rabbo, in general terms, how do you feel about the reaction thus far since Monday?
Well, we feel that there is a growing support from the Palestinian and the Israeli public opinion, and also there is an international growing interest in this document, which we call now Geneva document. We are also encouraged by the remarks that were made by Secretary Powell, because that's what we need, in fact, encouragement, support, and this initiative represents the attitude of so many people, of the mainstream among the Palestinian people, of so many Palestinian political organizations and social ones, figures, and the new generation even, the militants, they are showing more support to our initiative, because through the bitter experience of the past years, we have sent them a message. There is a way to get out of this cycle of violence. There is a way towards better future, a future built on hope, future for peace between the two nations on the basis of a two-state solution, the same vision which was declared by President Bush.
But Mr. Beilin, from the Israeli point of view, you are from the Israeli left, very much in opposition to the Sharon government, and they have dismissed this plan not primarily, but partly because you're involved in it, and they have other reasons. Do you see that as a serious setback?
Well, I had no doubt that such a plan would not have been accepted by the government of Mr. Sharon. But our biggest asset in Israel which is so proud to be a democratic state in the Middle East is the public opinion. And the support that we got from the public opinion is really beyond our expectations.
How is that measured? How do you know you have the public
We know
support?
it only according to the public opinion polls. We are having public opinion polls on Geneva almost every day. And the latest was 31% in favor, 37% against, and 20% undecided. This is a very big victory for us. And we believe that through the public opinion, it would be possible to change the policy of the government. After 3 years in which there was not even one meeting on the permanent solution, and so many people were killed on the Palestinian side and on the Israeli side.
Charles Krauthammer, who writes a column here, he's American, writes a column for the Washington Post, said that this document is in fact a suicide note for Israel.
I doubt it. What does he think about the current situation? I read his article, and I'm thinking to myself, he's looking at the last 3 years. Never in the past, never ever, so many civilians were killed in Israel in such a period. Should we go on? Is there an alternative? We have proven that we have a partner in the mainstream of each society. It is not only Yossi Beilin. We are having hundreds of people supporting it. We are having 25 signatories, among them the former chief of staff of the army, generals, lieutenant generals, major generals, people from different parties, including the Likud and the Shinui party in the coalition. Now, these people believe that they have to do something because the status quo is killing us. And people like Krauthammer may write very nice columns, but the question is, if you are an Israeli or if you are a Palestinian, can you comply with the ongoing situation? If there is a better solution, fine. We don't say that our solution is the Bible or the Quran or the New Testament. We will applaud anybody who will have a better agreement. But can we continue the current situation? Our answer is definitely no.
Your plan is 50 pages long and it's complex, and we're not about to be able to go through the whole thing here tonight. But the basic thing, well, how would you, in general terms, Mr. Rabbo, would it be correct to say that there will be a Palestinian state under your plan? Israel must go back to the 1967 borders.
Right.
Jerusalem becomes actually part of Palestine, but the Israelis have a right to go to Temple Mount, but it will be...
No, sir. Jerusalem will be shared.
Be shared.
Will be a capital for both states.
Okay.
The east part of Jerusalem will be the capital of the Palestinian state. The western part of Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and the old city will be open for both Israelis and Palestinians, and there will be international guarantees and even international presence there to guarantee that it will stay open.
But the old city is, there are many Israelis, as you know, Mr. Beilin, claim that has been part of Israel for 1,000 years, and yet under your plan it becomes property, even though it's open to Israelis, it becomes property of the Palestinian state, correct?
Only under our agreement, Israelis will go there. If you go today to Jerusalem, you won't find Israelis in East Jerusalem. Now, if it is open, if there is security, they will go there. It will be accessible. People will go to the holy places. People will go to the different neighborhoods. This is the nature of our agreement. Today, what we have is a virtual sovereignty over our own capital. Only two countries in the world recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, Costa Rica and El Salvador. Now, we believe that we have sovereignty over the Temple Mount. But in the Temple Mount, the real sovereign is the Palestinian or the Islamic Waqf. For 3 years, since the visit of Sharon in Temple Mount on the 28th of October 2000, no Jews were allowed to the Temple Mount because of the Islamic Waqf. Now, we are the sovereign. But this sovereignty is only virtual, only if there is an agreement, and it is under the official sovereignty of the Palestinian state. Paradoxically, because of the fact that there will be an agreement and there will be an international presence, it would be possible for every Jew to visit this place.
What about to the larger point about, many people say, well, there was the Oslo Accord, there have been all kinds of past agreements where essentially the same thing that you all have in terms of what was given to the Palestinians was in every one of them. but none of the things that the Palestinians were supposed to do actually happened. In other words, the terrorism continued, the attacks on Israeli civilians continued, despite some progress on returning some of the territories. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think that the past experience, especially in the past 3 years, had shown the need to move forward towards a political solution. I don't want to go to the experience since Oslo because there are so many controversial issues. Israel, for example, continued the policy of building settlements, of annexation of Palestinian land. And also there were so many violations to the Oslo Agreement. But I don't want to open this book now. We want to look towards future. Now we have a plan. This is the first comprehensive and detailed plan that includes solutions without any ambiguity, without any thing that is not resolved in it, in our history. And on the basis of this plan, which is a very realistic and pragmatic plan, we are in fact trying to solve all these issues, addressing the basic needs and interests of both sides, and showing that the interests of both sides can coexist with each other and not necessarily conflict with each other. We can have our own independent state, but this should not in any way endanger the security of Israel and its nature as a Jewish state. And on the other hand, Israel can withdraw from the Palestinian occupied territories and can be a safe country for its people and can build a good neighborly relations with the Palestinian state as well.
In general terms, not in specific terms, because we don't have time to go through the specifics here, what is really different than what you all are proposing and what has been proposed many, many times before over many, many tables among many officials of both entities?
There was never an agreed upon permanent solution for both sides. It was all either timetables, like the Oslo Agreement.
One step at a time. Do this and then we'll go.
And there was no end game. There was no picture of the end game, or ideas which were suggested by both sides separately. For the first time in history, there is a plan which is committed to by both sides, speaking about the mainstreams of the society. Now, once there is such an end game, once there is a political horizon, then there is a possibility to pacify the situation. The flaws of the past plans was that all of them were provisional, and both peoples were afraid to touch the moment of truth. The violations on both sides, by the way, stemmed mainly, in my view, from the fact that we let the extremists torpedo the permanent agreement, and the mainstream was not strong enough and did not have a horizon to fight for. Now we are giving the pragmatic people on both sides a very important flag to hoist, to say, okay, there is a plan, this might be a plan, don't disturb us, don't try to torpedo our hope.
Okay, you're here in the United States, you want the United States to support this plan. We've just reported what Secretary Powell said. You're going to meet with him on Friday, is that right?
Yes.
Here in Washington. Tomorrow you meet with Deputy Secretary of Defense Wolfowitz, is that correct?
No, we don't know.
No, you're not.
No, I don't
Are you meeting with any other U.S. officials?
Yes. We might meet with some more officials.
What do you want the United States to do now?
Well, in fact, we consider our plan to be complementary to the roadmap.
So it doesn't replace the roadmap?
Of course not. The roadmap consists of 3 phases. The first one for security arrangements, and the second one for interim steps for building confidence. The third phase includes the vision of President Bush to create a Palestinian state at the year of 2005.
Which he's committed to doing.
Of course. We are introducing a detailed plan for that vision. So we consider it as a complementary and not something that contradicts. And that's why we are really interested that the American administration will adopt and support our plan as being a plan that will complement the American efforts and give credibility also to the roadmap. Because when the people in both sides see that the end of the tunnel, there's a light, there's a concrete plan, there's a very detailed and pragmatic and possible plan to be implemented, in this case, they will trust the roadmap as a whole.
But as we sit here tonight, you two sit here as private individuals. You do not speak for the government of Israel.
No.
Do you speak for the Palestinian Authority?
No, I don't speak officially for the Palestinian Authority.
But they're behind this, are they not?
Of course. I'm a member of, in the leadership, the Palestinian leadership. I'm one of the oldest members. I report to my leadership, and they are backing the steps we are taking.
But without Israel, and without the government of Israel, it's just an interesting 50 pieces of paper, right?
This is very true. This is why my role and the role of my colleagues is to convince the public opinion in order to convince the government. We were successful in the past. This was the way when I began the Oslo process, when I was in opposition, when I began my efforts to withdraw unilaterally from Lebanon, when I was in position, and eventually, with the support of the public opinion, it was possible to convince the government. And in that respect, I'm a recidivist. I believe that it would be possible, again, to convince the pragmatic people of Israel that there is a hope, and they might convince the government.
And both of you are hopeful as you sit here?
We are. Okay. We are, because we believe in the power of the public opinion.
We are so pessimistic that we know that there is no better way than to take such a courageous move towards the future. And this is why our optimism stems from our pessimism.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And finally tonight, essayist Ann Taylor Fleming considers things that matter.
It was a week's vigil, riveting and awful, as we sat in front of our TV sets, watching much of Southern California burn to the ground, watching people flee with what few possessions they could get out with. The fires finally were stopped, and then we watched the new footage. People stumbling through the charred remains of their houses, using their hands as clumsy sifters. Perusing our own houses, we made mental notes, thinking about what would matter, what we would bolt with in a disaster. What stuff? DVDs? Computers? Tools? Toys? Hardly. Clothes? Maybe a handful. Important papers? Wills? Insurance policies? Maybe, but those are replaceable. Jewelry, specifically meaningful items?
We are looking for my grandmother's wedding ring. My mom was unable to get it when she took off.
Now we're getting close. The stuff of sentiment, the stuff of your history, the trigger prompts for your memories.
She had some pictures and stuff from her great-grandparents and great-grandparents, grandparents, parents, and she was hoping to pass it down through the generations.
And yes, the photo albums. That's what you'd go for first. We listened to countless evacuees talking about that. Pictures. Baby pictures, graduation pictures, wedding pictures. These are the things that are irreplaceable. And then the letters, the written record. Things I wrote, things written to me. Cards, notes, diaries. Where are they? Where did I put them? The last time we had a big earthquake out here in L.A., I actually got out the love letters my husband wrote me when I was very young and at the beginning of being loved, and I put them here, right here, so I could get them first and fast. I thought about the choices we make and about those love letters again when I read the letters some of the soldiers in Iraq had written home. They were printed recently on the op-ed page of the New York Times. How simple they looked, tender and immediate. This is Captain Joshua Byers writing to his mother and father.
I still love being a commander. I love leading troops and taking care of them. It is a huge responsibility, and I feel the weight of it every day. I send the thing I love most out here, my men, into harm's way every day and every night.
That was Captain Byers' last letter to his mother and father before he was killed in action. All the letters were the last. I read and reread them, hoping they would stop hurting, and they didn't. And I thought about the miraculous potency of words. Listen to Army Private First Class Rachel Bosfeld of Oshkosh, Wisconsin, writing to her mother.
Oh, how my feet hurt. 18 days till my birthday. I can't wait.
She died 12 days later. The last letters. Are they solace or stabs to the heart, or both? Will they be put away or reread compulsively? I don't know. What I do know is how much they matter, more than the wedding rings and the photographs. Here are the words of 34-year-old Army Private First Class Jesse A. Givens, writing to his wife.
You will never know how complete you have made me. You saved me from loneliness and taught me how to live and to love.
And in the same letter, to his 6-year-old stepson, Dakota.
You taught me how to care until it hurts. You have a big, beautiful heart. Through life, you need to keep it open and follow it. I will always be there in our park when you dream, so we can play.
This was his last letter, written to be delivered to his family if he died.
I will always be there with you, Melissa. I will always want you, need you, and love you in my heart, my mind, and my soul. Do me a favor after you tuck the children in. Give them hugs and kisses from me. And go outside and look at the stars and count them. Don't forget to smile. Your husband, Jess.
These are the things that matter most, these letters. They are what we would flee our houses with, and what we leave behind for those we have loved. I'm Ann Taylor Fleming.
Again, the major developments of this day. The head of the Iraqi Governing Council outlined a plan for using militia groups to battle insurgents. Police in Saudi Arabia announced the first arrest in a deadly bombing at a housing compound. And the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission proposed new rules to stop after-hours trading in mutual funds. We'll see you online and again here tomorrow evening. I'm Jim Lehrer. Thank you and good night.
Major funding for the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer has been provided by...
Can you paint something beautiful with sunflowers? Drive forever on corn? If you ask the right questions, nature will answer. ADM, the nature of what's to come.
And by SBC Communications, committed to providing Americans more choices in high-speed internet access and working to widen opportunities in broadband technology. As providers, as people, we're SBC Communications.
This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
To purchase video cassettes of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer, call 1-866-678-NEWS.
We are PBS.
Hear all your holiday favorites played by the Cincinnati Pops Orchestra coming up next on PBS.
If it ain't a pleasure, it ain't a poem.
So beautiful, that couple, in handsome black and red clothes, walking along the street, her arms folded, his in pockets cold, scarves loosely wrapped about white necks. And in the subway car, a black man takes a black woman's hands, and her eyes look far away beyond the walls under the sea, and his eyes concentrate on her hands as glasses drop slightly down his nose, as she turns and smiles as he looks up at clay made whole. And she takes her hands about his cheeks, makes a vase, and he smiles as roses are put in his mouth and hair, and her brown leather coat crumples as she kisses him, and his black windbreaker is crumpled by her kiss, and for 2 subway stops their kiss moves a man to write and get up in the morning and sing an old song, to remember a woman in a dream who held his hands, wearing earrings of white moons, in black hair open as a fan, blowing honeyed wind about the room in which they loved and loved, as kingdoms came and went, in which they loved and loved, as the black man and woman left their embrace to slowly get up to the door by an old man in the window seat, into whose hands dropped 2 white moons.